Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Salvation Army this morning. Yes, the screen is just supposed to be a logo for the moment. We're going to get started with some praise and worship this morning, but due to the technical difficulties that we've had over the last few weeks, we just don't have the computer power to stream properly. This is all pre-recorded. Brittany and I will be in the chat and watching along with you this morning, but we do pray that this is a good time of worship for you and that we're able to grow through it. And also that you just stick with us through it all. There'll be a couple of announcements at the end. So let's begin with some praise and worship this morning.
God, I'm running for your heart. I'm running for your heart till I am a soul on fire. Lord, I'm longing for your place. I'm waiting for the day when I am a soul on fire, till I am a soul on fire. God, I'm running for your heart, I'm running for your heart, till I am a soul on fire. Lord, I'm longing for your ways, waiting for the day when I am a soul on fire, till I am a soul on fire. Lord, restore the joy I have wandered, bring me back in this darkness, lead me through until all I see is you. God, I'm running for your heart, I'm running for your heart till I am a soul on fire. Lord, I'm longing for your ways, I'm waiting for the day when I am a soul on fire, till I am a soul on fire. Lord, let me burn for you again. Let me return to you again. Lord, let me burn for you again. Let me return to you again. God, I'm running for your heart, I'm running for your heart till I am a soul on fire. Lord, I'm longing for your ways, I'm waiting for the day when I am a soul on fire. God, I'm running for your heart, running for your heart till I am a soul on fire, till I am a soul on fire, till I am a soul on fire. As I was buried beneath my shame, who could carry that kind of weight? It was my turn till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my doom till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old made new, Jesus, when I met you, you called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy, chains break at the weight of your glory. Needed shelter, I was an orphan, now you called me the citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing, now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open, so when you called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day.
A couple months ago, we talked in Sunday school about the city of Nineveh, some of its history, the archaeology, the rediscovery of that city's existence as it had been sort of lost to time. I'm fascinated by it. Recently, it's come up quite a few times, though, as well. We discussed last week on Sunday briefly the story of Jonah, and he had to go to Nineveh. We discussed Ezekiel, who was in the Babylonian exile, ministering to the Israelites, and Nineveh is a big part of Babylon. And we even had a conversation on Facebook about it this week. Like, Jonah has brought up the topic of Nineveh, as well as just Nineveh being interesting in and of itself, a lot recently. And last week, as I began to study the book of Ezekiel a little bit more, I was just really drawn and compelled to its message for us today as Christians. Now, I get that if you've read through the book of Ezekiel, there's a lot of things in it that are very specific to the people in Israel that Ezekiel is sent as a watchman to, and it may not feel like it applies to 21st century America. But I really think that there's a message in here for anybody who's going through a difficult time, be it as an individual, a nation, on any scale. If you are going through a difficult time and don't feel particularly close to God, there's a lot to work through in that, but there's a good message for us in this part in the book of Ezekiel. And the Bible does an amazing job keeping it all founded and keeping all of Scripture, because this is what it starts with, this is what it's all about, founded on Jesus. And so I kind of wanted to spend a bit more time in Ezekiel, and was really called to do this, and hopefully we'll get a benefit out of this morning for us in our current time and the current struggles that we're dealing with in our world as a church, as a group of Christians, as individuals. And so, this morning we're looking at Ezekiel chapter 1. Ezekiel chapter 4 is kind of where we're going to be launching into. Ezekiel chapter 1 just gives us an introduction to Ezekiel and his call as a prophet of God. And so we learn that Ezekiel is a priest. He is the son of a man named Buzi, I believe is how it's pronounced. And he is out by a river, and he's looking off into the distance, and he sees an amazing vision. That's the word I'm looking for. Vision of God. Starting with verse 4, he says, "I looked and saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was
what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had 4 faces, 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. All 4 of them had faces and wings, and the wings of one touched the wings of the other. Each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Now, first off, as you dive into this, there's probably a few inherent or implicit reactions that one would have. The first is just to sort of glaze through it. You see all throughout Scripture, there's some very descriptive imagery of heavenly beings. And typically, you either glaze over it because you don't really know what to make of it, it's all kind of difficult to envision, or you spend way too much time like picking apart the little bitty details. And I would imagine that for a lot of Christians, it is difficult to study the Bible on your own. Maybe you only get insight when you listen to other preachers or podcasts or videos or whatever, your friends, I don't know. But it is incredibly important to be able to read the Word and believe and understand something in it and be able to go deeper with others. That's fine, but you have to be able to read it yourself and begin to see Jesus. Now, that can be difficult for a lot of reasons, I do understand, but today, one of the main goals that I kind of had going into this was, let's look at this from the simplest perspective. Let's look at this just from things that I see as a 21st century Western American Christian that pop out at me. How does that teach me about God? And pretty much this whole chapter is just about God. And what does that mean for me as a Christian? And so while studying the Bible with cultural context, understanding what's happening around the text is very important and can be very helpful, it is not a necessity to understanding Jesus in the Bible or seeing Jesus in the Bible. It's very helpful to begin to get a bigger picture, but it is not an essential reality in studying and salvation. And the second thing really to keep in the back of your head as you're reading this is, if it seems confusing or if it seems abstract and it's difficult to understand, the best advice that I've ever heard comes from Dr. Bill Urey, who basically said, slow down, read it, stop, wait. And as you read slowly, you're going to pick up things that just make sense in English, and maybe you have some understanding of the imagery in it because of that. But for now, you're just going to dive in and slow down. And so, what we see first is a bunch of very specific things. A windstorm coming from the north, a cloud, flashing lightning, brilliant light, the center of fire, glowing metal. The appearance of creatures. We'll start with those first things, actually. So, we all know what wind is, and if you read this, you might even be able to jump to other stories in the Bible where you remember wind or the presence of these different elements and environmental effects. I looked and I saw a windstorm. I think of the wind that stops the water so that the Israelites can walk across dry ground, or the storm on Mount Sinai, or the wind that is hovering over the surface of the deep that's described as the Spirit in Genesis. Simple stories in the Old Testament that have a lot to do with wind, but it's always a symbol of the presence of God. You think of an immense cloud with flashing lightning, like that's very Sinai-esque. You think of Moses on the mountain with this great storm that engulfs the top of it. Well, that's very, very Sinai, and that's what I think of, but again, it's indicative of the presence of God. You see this center of fire look like glowing metal, and this is where, having a better general reading of the Bible is helpful, because glowing metal is used often by theologians and by biblical writers to describe this idea of two things in one, and specifically of Jesus. As the incarnate God, we have the divine and the human, two in one. And it's used again later in this chapter. And so we have this idea of all these different elements that hopefully you can latch onto and think like, boy, there's a lot going on here. Like, this is kind of a scary scene. We got storms and lightning and wind, and pretty much everything described in this section is something that you're usually told to go inside and seek shelter during. And as somebody who lives in Oklahoma right now, pretty close to home, probably nowhere near the grandeur here in Oklahoma as what Ezekiel is seeing. But all things that I can relate to. And then we get to this part that maybe it might be a little bit more difficult to relate to. I looked, starting in verse 5, and the fire looked like, where am I here? And in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had 4 faces, 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf, and gleamed with burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. All of them had faces and wings, and the wings of one touched the wings of the other. Each one went straight ahead, and they did not turn as they moved. And this description continues as you continue to read this passage. But they actually remind me of something that we've discussed before here in Sunday school, which is the Lamassu statues. Now, the Lamassu statues, are these massive chunks of rock that have carved into them depictions of creatures that sound very similar like this so far. They're the face of a human with the body of a horse or an ox or something like that. They've got grand wings. The human has a grand beard and a big hat, which might sound a little silly, but in ancient culture, that was a symbol of power. And they have these feet that look like the feet of the animal that the other half is. Ooh, excuse me, I'm sorry. And they are just these majestic rock carvings that were actually pulled out of excavated Nineveh. And they currently sit in the British Museum, but there are replicas all over the world because they really are amazing. And they either sat at the city gate or in the gate of the throne room. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they were designed to intimidate and to show the power of the king. Now, they're a very pagan image. Most pagan religions back then had this mixture of man and beast. And here we see this kind of described with these heavenly beings. And so while it may seem at first glance, if you're reading through this, a little abstract, a little hard to get your head around, for Ezekiel, it may not have been that foreign to him. Certainly seeing them in this way would have been, but seeing them at all probably was not that foreign to him. And so, it describes their faces. Their faces looked like this. Each of the 4 had a face of a human being. On the right side, each had the face of a lion. On the left, the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. I believe that what God's doing here is he's taking imagery that Ezekiel knows and that he can explain to his fellow Israelites, and he's sort of warping his image here and bending it into something that Ezekiel might be able to handle. Everything in heaven is abstract to us because we may not have words to describe exactly the throne room that surrounds God. But he gives it to us in ways that we understand. And this is no different. And there's a good reason for this that we'll get to. They had each had 2 wings spreading upward, each wing touching that of the creature on either side, and each had 2 other wings covering its body. Each one went straight ahead. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go, without turning as they went. And it's so important here to recognize that all of the actions of these creatures and of everything that's happening in this scene right now is dictated by the Spirit. That they are all deeply in tune with it, and that all of their actions, their movements, come from the Spirit. And so we continue. Each one went straight ahead. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go without turning. The appearance of the living creature was like burning coals or fire, like torches. Fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. The creatures sped back and forth like flashes of lightning. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw wheels on the ground, beside each creature with its 4 faces. This was the appearance and the structure of the wheels. They sparkled like topaz, and all 4 looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel intersecting a wheel. And so you get this image, a very kind of strange image, especially for ancient culture, of these 2 wheels that seem to move together to create smooth motion in any direction. And as you continue to read, you also see these wheels go up and down with the creatures. And these wheels are controlled, again, by the Spirit. Anywhere the creatures go, they go. The creatures went no direction without them. Maybe you've seen the more recent adaptation of the movie The Lorax. And you see this, there's the main character, and his goal is to go and find a tree, because there's a girl he likes who likes trees. And the whole area is made of plastic. And so the whole city is just commercialized with plastic. They sell air. And the way that he gets around to go visit the Lorax is on this like one-wheel scooter thing. And he just whips in and out that can go any direction, and it's incredibly smooth. And it's kind of what I envision this might be like. Not a scooter and cartoonized like this, but the movement of these is smooth and uninhibited. And it's this idea, at least I feel like, God can move anywhere. He can go anywhere. These creatures, they have unimpeded movement. They have four faces. They can see in all directions. And you might be able to extrapolate that with the eyes on the wheels. They're covered in eyes, it says, all around. They're completely unimpeded in their movement, in the direction they can go, in the things that they see, and the knowledge they have. With the ox and the eagle and the lion, they have this sort of unparalleled ability to tackle problems that come their way. So you get this deep impression of God. And I don't think you have to dig very deep for that. But even if you don't see that, it's fine. What you're seeing is a description of the Spirit of God. And so you continue to read, their rims were high and awesome, and all four rims were full of eyes all around. When living creatures moved, the wheels beside them moved. When the living creatures rose from the ground, the wheels also rose. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go, and the wheels would rise along with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. And so you get this unity on all parts working together. The creatures, the Spirit, and the wheels all together working as one. Spread about above the heads of the living creatures what looked like a vault, sparkling like crystal and awesome. Under the vault their wings were stretched out one toward the other, and each had two wings covering its body. When the creatures moved, I heard the sound of wings like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army. When they stood still, they lowered their wings. Then there came a voice above the vault over their heads, as they stood lowered with wings. Above the vault over their heads was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli, and high above the throne was a figure like that of a man. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal. Here it is again. As it is full of fire. And from there down, he looked like fire. And so you get this kind of floating image of the fire as the bottom of his body and the top like glowing metal. Certainly you've seen that videos of a blacksmith or seen a blacksmith in real life working with metal, and the way that it grows, it's incredibly unique to the characteristic of metal. Like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. So we start with this description that has a discussion of flashing lightning and brilliant light. I think of the Temple of Solomon, when he dedicates it to God, it just explodes in this light. I like technology. I like engineering. I like watching things where people use their engineering prowess and their wits and their intelligence to do something creative. And it's just a real fascinating thing to watch creation happen. And one person that I watched the other day, he happened to get his hands on the most powerful single unit LED. Now, for those of you that don't know, LEDs are the most common lights that you see inside of modern technology. An LED can be very small, it's very energy efficient. No matter its shape or size, the light can still function, which is very not normal for light bulbs, at least not what we would typically see in light bulbs. Incandescent light bulbs have to be a certain shape, otherwise they don't really function properly. LEDs can be used for so many things. If you have a modern smartphone with a flash on it for your camera that you've ever used as a flashlight, that is an LED. They're tiny, they're energy efficient, they take virtually no power, and they don't give off a lot of heat, which is part of what makes them so handy. He got his hands on what was the most powerful single unit LED. It's about this big around, and when on at full power, consumed about 1,500 watts. Now, you don't need to know a lot about electricity. Just understand that that is a ton of light and a ton of power for an LED. It's actually quite tricky to run this light. In fact, that amount of power is about 4 times as much as just my computer at my house. Like it doesn't come close to that. And if it tried to, it would just turn off. It can't handle it. And so he powers it up with some interesting wiring and some interesting systems. And at 10% power, the light overpowers the camera. You can't actually watch the video properly anymore because there's nothing to see. It just completely overpowers the sensor. He's wearing sunglasses. He can't, there's really no difference between 12% and 100% in the video because you just can't see it anymore. But you know what it's like to look at a bright light. If you've ever been driving on the highway while they've been doing construction at night and you get these massive, powerful spotlights that just seem to light up for miles. It's something like that, but this is the presence of God. And if you study physics at all, if you're at least even remotely interested, you probably know that light is pretty unique in the world. You see, science has done a great deal to sort of pin down and understand the rules of how nature works. This is the system by which the universe seems to be working, with one major exception being light. As much as we know about it, it is still so unique and so complicated and can do very interesting things. Light itself has the force to move an object, but it doesn't push us over, even though it is moving faster than anything else on our planet. Sometimes it acts like a radio wave and it bounces around and goes through things. Sometimes it acts more like a particle and it hits an object and it bounces off and that's it. It's a very complicated part of nature. You see, last week, or a couple weeks ago, we talked about on Sunday how a lot of people are asking questions that kind of lead you to understand their model of thinking about God is whether or not God is asleep at the wheel or if he's got his hand controlling each and every single detail of everybody's life. And both of them are wrong, and if you want more details about that, go watch that video. But one of the big reasons they're wrong is they put God in a box where he's only one way, and you can't do that to light. And God's presence is described most normally as light. Don't put him in a box. And finally, Ezekiel says that this was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. And when I saw it, I fell face down and I heard the voice of one speaking. Now, I've blown through this very quickly. You could talk a lot about different elements of this. You know, if I think about fire, even just from today's modern thinking, I know that fire is a source of light. It can be a source of sterilization and cleaning. It is a source of destruction. All of those things are true of God, and it works for these more deep analogies that we can start to draw. But there's a couple things that are so plain here that you need no cultural context for, and that is, this is what God is like. He is so indescribable, we get these very abstract images to do even a fraction of a good job, I'm assuming, at describing just the effect his presence has on its surroundings. He looks up and he sees glowing metal as a body and fire as feet, essentially. This doesn't typically line up with my understanding of what people look like. But this is the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. Why is he showing this to Ezekiel? And what on earth does this have to do with us, 21st century America, working through this time of a coronavirus and all these different things? What does it have to do? Well, all of this may seem abstract, and especially the creatures, as I mentioned before, may seem very abstract to us. I can relate to fire and storms and wind, light, rainbows. I can't relate to four-headed creatures. Like, I have no context for that. But these weird hybrid creatures between mankind and animal are quite common in ancient culture. And it does help to have a bit of cultural context here. Ezekiel, and really everybody in Israel, would have been common with this. It's quite an ancient and normal pagan system where you have these half animal, half human creatures. And it was no different in Babylon, in Nineveh even, the capital here that is being dealt with. We've seen it in archaeology. And I feel like I mentioned this earlier, God is sort of bending or blending his image with things. He's borrowing, in a way, our understanding to show us himself. And that may seem like a stretch because it's a pagan thing and God's not going to work with that. That's not really what I mean. But God does this all the time, which is awesome. He uses systems that we understand to help us see and understand little bits of who he is more. They would not have been as shocked by this as maybe we are. It might not be as difficult to them as it might be for us. But put yourself in the head of these people. If you read the next couple chapters of Ezekiel, you get a brief idea as to his mission and therefore what Israel is dealing with. Israel is in captivity to a pagan nation who worships hybrid creature gods. They are in the middle of a very broken time for this culture. They have no cultural identity. Their temple is gone. Their connection to their religion and their religious system is gone. They are basically being forced to assimilate in a completely foreign culture. And they are probably feeling lost and forsaken, desolate, and just not connected to God. And in the middle of all of this, we get this image of God that they can relate to. And I think it's God saying to the Israelites, guess what? I'm not gone. I'm still here for you. I've got your back. You're not alone. Here I am. And I wonder, during a time when people are maybe losing loved ones, when people are dealing with death, with our healthcare workers constantly watching people die day in and day out, when we maybe even just be stuck at home and would give anything just to be able to go play outside or something. I don't know what you're struggling with. When we are idle, our minds tend to wander and get the better of us, and maybe we make poor decisions. We may feel a little lost, maybe even a little forgotten. What is God saying to us, though? One of the most important parts of this chapter is Ezekiel is actually ready and listening and willing to look and receive God. He was among the exiles, it says in the first verse, and he saw the heavens open and saw visions of God. I looked and I saw a windstorm. He's paying attention. He is at a place where he can see God. This isn't something that happens by accident. I don't believe for a minute Ezekiel's just walking down the road one day and goes, oh, there's a windstorm. I guess I'm going to be a prophet. No, God's calling him to be a prophet, but he is actively looking and watching. So, 21st century Western American church, what is God saying to us that we may not be seeing? Perhaps during this time, you have a unique opportunity to sit back and let God speak to you. Not that we cannot let him speak to us, but to look and to watch and to be ready for how he reveals himself to us. There's all sorts of things in this chapter. Just study it over and over. Even just connections to Jesus in this are amazing. You look at these four creatures, they each have the head of a human, of a lion, of an ox, and of an eagle. And those line up with the different ways that the Gospels portray Jesus. It's always about Jesus. What is he trying to show us today? There is an amazing correlation between Jesus and some of the things happening in this chapter. Beyond all that, God uses our own limited understanding to reveal himself to us all the time. He makes a covenant with Abraham in Genesis 15 and uses the terms of that covenant through the sacrifice of Jesus to absolve himself of it so that the covenant can be opened to all of us. He does it in a legalistic way, not because he has to, but because he loves us enough to reveal himself to us. Even when he's relating to the people of Israel through maybe their just back of their mind sense of understanding of these mixed creatures. Maybe they got them from an image of God. I do not know. But we cannot put God in a box, and we have to be, even in times, especially in times of difficulty, looking for what God is trying to say to us. He is in control. But I think more than all of that, the lesson for us in this, and the lesson for all of these, and this will hopefully help you with all prophetic imagery about heavenly beings. What is the function of all this? Is it to help us understand what God looks like? I don't think so. I don't think my brain can fully comprehend what God looks like. But I think it's to show us about the effect that the presence of God has on people and things around him. These creatures are controlled and follow in every step, ultimately, in what the Spirit has for them. We talk a lot about how God is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient. But here it's sort of like you get this omnicompetence, his ability to handle all situations and help in any way, no matter the difficulty or the trial. We see that in the different ways these creatures are described, but that's all just bonus to the fact that these creatures are living and breathing in harmony and worship with God. And isn't that what we should strive for? In times of difficulty or in times of good, make me more like these creatures. We have a wonderful hymn that we sing from time to time, "Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. My best through day or by night, awake or sleep, make your presence your presence is my light," is essentially what it says. That's how these creatures live. Their eyes focused on God. "Be thou my vision's not a cute poem for like a mission statement. But I think it's a literal vision. Keep my vision focused on you. These creatures are in constant connection and in harmony with God. You cannot do that with partial worship. You cannot do that with just church on Sundays. You cannot do that with save me from my soul or my sins, forgive me, Lord, but let me do these X, Y, and Z things because they're not so bad. It doesn't work that way. They are fully tuned in to God. Ezekiel is fully expecting God to show up, and he's watching. What are we missing right now? Maybe God is trying to speak to you in this time, reveal himself to you so that you might know him more intimately. I don't know what he's trying to tell us, but I'm not going to be caught unprepared to hear his message. So we're going to sing, "Be Thou My Vision." And as we sing, I hope that you pray through this, that you become like one of these creatures, fully in tuned to God. And you pray that he reveals himself to us in this time.
Lord of
That's our service for this morning. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We are going to continue to meet like this until further notice. I know the country has opened up. We're working with DHQ and evaluating things. We would have to take extreme measures to make sure people are safe in this facility if we were to meet. And so for the next 2 weeks, we are going to continue to meet like this unless you see something different on Facebook. So we will see you hopefully soon, but for now we do have to continue to meet like this. And I'll be hopefully putting up a post at some point this week that kind of explains more about our plan here. Thank you for watching and for joining us over these last few weeks digitally. Please continue to do so. If you have any questions, of course, reach out to us. We will be starting James chapter 1 in Bible study this Wednesday at 6 p.m. Have a great day. Have a blessed week. Stay safe. And please join us again on Wednesday.